What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the first episode of me explaining what is going on in these videos. There's a lot of bandsaw box tutorials and videos and books out there, so I won't go into too much detail about the concept, but I will talk about some of the things I do differently compared to most boxes. I'll be making a box I designed a while back, and it's called Coop. There's a free template available in the description, and feel free to scale it up or down to whatever size you would like. So I already have my blank glued up and sized to fit the template height. I like to leave extra room on the sides, maybe a ½ inch on each side. Most bandsaw box tutorials suggest resawing the back of the box off and then gluing it back on later. And to avoid that, I leave the back piece off entirely when gluing up my blank. Now that our blank is ready to go, I go ahead and cut the top and bottom pieces off. And take your time with these cuts and try to stay on the line as best you can. If your bandsaw fence is set up and you can avoid drift, feel free to use it. And my fence drift situation isn't ideal, so I like to freehand all of my cuts. The next step is to make the cross cuts, and since this box has 2 drawers, we'll make 4 cross cuts. If this was a single drawer box, we could just cut the sides off now instead of making partial cuts. Make sure not to cut too far into the middle divider of the box. After the cross cuts, we can glue the top and bottom piece back on. I try to limit any glue squeeze out from getting on the inside of the box because that could inhibit our ability to release the drawers later on. Instead, I spread the glue towards the outside of the box, and for clamping, I just make sure that the template lines are aligned and each piece is flat against my work surface. Once the glue is dried, it's time to make the second set of cuts. These cuts will release the 2 drawers, which you can set aside and we'll work on later. This is another narrow cut with very little room for error, so just take your time and follow the line as best you can. Now the box can be glued back together again. And same as before, make sure the pieces are flush against your work surface, and squeeze out isn't as critical as any of the glue can just be cleaned up later on. And make sure your template lines are lined up nicely before tightening all of the clamps. And to save time, it's helpful to stagger your glue ups. While this dries, work on your drawers, and while the drawers are being glued, work on your handles, and so on. And we have to create a cavity in this drawer, and so first we have to cut the front and back off the drawer. I mark a line in the top of the drawer that will give me a 1/4 to 3/8 inch thick cut. Make sure to label all your pieces as it isn't too difficult to get these pieces mixed up when going to glue everything back together. Next, I mark a U shape on the front or back of the drawer, either one. It is inset about a 1/4 inch from the outside. It is very important that you cut out the correct side of the drawer, or else your drawer will be upside down. Don't ask me how I know that. I use the spindle sander to clean off any saw marks. If your cut is a little messy, you can take this time to smooth everything out. And next, glue the front and back pieces back together. It's important to align everything on the sides and bottom. Any deviations will have to be sanded away later, which can result in bigger gaps with your drawers inside the box. Back to the box. Most of the time I'll use a block plane to flush it up on the back, and this time I use my joiner, making sure to take very light passes. Once I've done that, I can glue on the back. I like to save the piece with the nicest grain for the back because it won't have any cuts interrupting the look of it. And make sure there is a surplus of material on all 4 sides of the box. The excess can be trimmed away later. And after the glue is dried, trim the left and right sides of the box to final width. This will be the outside lines of the template. Any saw marks can be cleaned up with your sander of choice later on. And keep in mind this is going to be end grain, so it can take some time to get nice and smooth. And to flush up the top and bottom, I use a block plane. You can also use a flush trim bit or a belt sander. In this case, I'm taking relatively light passes until the back piece is flush with the rest of the box. And back to the drawers, this is probably the smallest piece I'll comfortably run over my jointer. I just try to take very, very light passes until the bottom is smooth and flat. You can also use a hand plane or a sander to do this. You can also take this time to sand the edges of the drawers, but make sure not to take off too much material because this can just further enhance the gaps that will be on the left and right side of your drawers. Because we made through cuts earlier, the drawer will be the same exact size as the opening that it should fit in. So use a block plane to creep up on the best fit. A few passes around the rim of the box should leave you with the perfect fitting drawers. Now on to the legs and handles. I'm using a CNC router to cut them out, but normally I just use the bandsaw. And for these cuts, I'm using a 1/4 inch, 2 flute spiral upcut end mill. And using the CNC router gives me more consistent results and doesn't take too much longer to set up, especially if I'm making a large batch of boxes. Before attaching the legs and handles, I sand everything up to 220 grit. And for small glue ups like this, I like to use a few dabs of CA glue to tack everything in place, and then a few dabs of wood glue for long-term strength. I apply light pressure until the CA glue sets up, and then apply a few clamps. Each box gets the PerlaWorks seal of approval, and then it's time for finish. I'm using white bond poly for this box. A few light coats is all that's needed. After the poly cures, I like to give the piece a light coat of paste wax. Lastly, because of the way bandsaw box drawers are made, they will typically sit recessed in the box, and to make them sit flush, I like to apply little felt pads to the back of the drawer. If the pads are too thick, you can easily slice them to the right thickness with a sharp razor blade. That wraps it up for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.